cable tie gun, and I wanted to kind of show the disassembly and reassembly of it, since I couldn't find anything particular online about it. So here we go. This is the gun. I just got it off eBay. It's in fairly good shape, but it definitely needs cleaning. So some of the tools we're going to need first is a good mid-size flathead, nice and sharp. And it is going to need to have something with a 1/4 inch extension on it. You will need a hex key. This is about a 2.5 mil, something around that size should work. You may need a knife, something to be able to stick into it. I didn't end up using it here though. Some good needle nose type pliers will be good to have. So here we go. The first thing we're going to want to do is just start taking these screws off. This first one is strange. It is actually a left-handed thread, so don't destroy that one there. So go ahead and take this off. And these next ones here are going to go back to a standard right-hand thread. And excuse the audio and everything on this, the whole video, because I actually have to record this separately, and I had the damn camera held in my mouth and a headlamp on my head. So let's see. So then to take it apart, we're going to take that flathead and stick it in between here where the little trigger is, and just lightly spread that open. Not all the way. You're going to start at one side because there is a spring right here in the back. Very strong spring. You can see it right there. It can shoot out violently. Ask me how I know. So go ahead and take this top plate off, and what I'm showing here is there's a pin right there that can get stuck in the top. It kind of has a loose side and a tight side. For me, it was actually the other way around, where it got stuck in the top. When I was taking it apart, I went ahead and stuck it in the bottom because it's much easier to assemble and disassemble. So for the spring, you take that flathead with that 1/4 inch extension on it. It needs that extra bit of space around it so you can hold that spring in. So get that stabbed in there, keep that thumb on it, and then pop it up. You'll hear it click, comes on out nice and smooth. It is ground flush, so it has sharp edges on both sides. So let's test the function a little bit, just kind of see how things work, because it is mildly complicated inside. Obviously it only goes back together one way, but there's a lot of ways it won't go back together as well. So the first thing to get this whole assembly out is just pretty much just lift it straight up. And most of it comes together, or comes out just all as one piece together. So this little carbon steel part in the front, that kind of slides out towards the front of the gun, and the rest of it comes out together. But you want to hold this together as it is when you take it out, because there is a little ring sleeve here, a little bearing ring that goes around that pin. And that, you lose that, this whole thing ain't going back together very well. So take that off. Luckily it had some old grease, so it was pretty sticky. It was kind of hard to fall out on its own. But so then for the rest of this, you're going to set that aside. You can take all those pieces essentially apart. For this pin right here, this is what I was talking about. So mine actually came off in the top originally, and it was stuck in that little register there. But it's much easier, in my opinion, to get this thing apart and back together if you do it, if you take that out and make sure it gets stuck into the bottom casting. As you can see, this is how it actually came off originally for me, but that's the loose side that's kind of stuck in there now. Again, that may be from wear, or that may be from anything. And this down here is the actual tension selector, which will let it decide how you're gonna, how tense or how tight it's gonna actually get the tie before it cuts it. Now, I'm not gonna take any of this apart except very mildly for cleaning. There's this pin here that comes out, and then that little arm swings free. The rest of it is a little too complicated for me to care about, and it seems to be working just fine on mine. Sorry if you need to find out how to do that. I'm not gonna be able to show you here. Get that back in. That pin is very important that it's in the right spot for the handle to go back together right. Get that fitted back in there. Not that you need to just take it out in the first place, but you can kind of see how the whole mechanism works. And if it doesn't look like it's working like that on yours, then it probably ain't working. So Then we're going to get on to reassembly. So for this, these are all essentially one piece, but they can be taken apart. You can see there's a little pin there on that arm that sticks out towards the front. That's gonna ride in. But it's kind of easy to get the whole thing mixed up. But that little thing right there goes down inside the rubber part of the handle. And the rest of it, you're going to essentially line up all 4 of those holes. Not the one right there, not the longest piece, but the other 4 holes. You're going to line all those up for the pin. And there's going to be a gap there for that ring sleeve to go back in. So sometimes that the arm sticking out the front will fall off of that pin. So you kind of have to pull that thing back out. It's easier when it's not full of old grease from 40 years ago. Then you want to get that back on there. And you can see how that rides inside of there. So then you're going to line all those holes back up and hold it just like that. And very carefully, more carefully than you're about to see me do. And you get that little ring sleeve. Yeah, that one right there. Try to fit it back in there, then it's going to fall out of your hand. You're going to pick it back up. Put it in your other hand. Then you're going to put it back in that hand. Alright, then you're going to think about it, figure out how you're going to do it, then you're going to get it stuck in there. Then you're going to use your hex key. Stick that through all those holes together and that ring sleeve to hold it all together. And I'm going to kind of cover it with my hand so you can't see it, but I'm putting the end of that hex key on that pin to kind of use that as a register, so that way it can ride down onto there just smoothly. So then, once you get that just barely started through the first hole, you're going to kind of just move it a little bit back and forth and press down on the whole mechanism to get that into place like that, and you stop right there. You do not want to go further than that, because you still have to fit that little steel bit on the front. So to get this, and I'm kind of going to cover it with my hand as well, but on the very front there's a little tab that goes into a little slot. That little tab there goes into a little slot, and that has to be the first thing that goes in. There's also a pin that sticks up about center ways on that. So you got to get that on the little thing there, pull the whole mechanism, yep, right there, forward with it, and then that little bearing rides in that race right there. And I pushed it down a little too early, forgot to get the spring guide back in place. That has to go right in there. There you go, you push that all back together, and there you go, you are pretty much back assembled. Except, now you gotta get that spring in there. So, this can be the kind of dangerous part. Can come apart, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this little left hand thread screw back in. So always spin it the opposite way to drop it into those threads. You definitely don't want to destroy threads on a casting, because then, well, the whole thing's trash. Alright, the spring, very tight, hard to get in just by hand. So this is where that little 1/4 inch extension is going to come into play, because it needs to be something that's going to be able to push on the outside of that spring. And that flathead, it's going to stick in there to kind of keep it in place. Now hold that down with your thumb, push it in until it clicks. You know it's kind of seated in there, just like that. I'll show you how it's going to look, about like that. Then take something and stab that down in there. Get it all the way in. Give it a little function test. And there you go. Now, get this casting, the top plate back on. So, the little pin I showed you for the tension selector is actually the first thing that needs to go in. I kind of screwed this up here on the very beginning. as you'll see, I'm fighting it. It's fighting me back. Okay, so then I'm going to figure out, well, let's take it back apart. That little pin right there needs to go into that little hole right there. So I would work on getting that in there first, then you can get the larger pin that holds the whole trigger mechanism in place. Get that seated, then you can wiggle it around. There you go, you hear a nice snap on there. And you'll see it sits pretty tight the whole way around. If it's not, then you might have to take that back off and figure out what's going on. Then get your screws back on in there. The correct right-handed screws. And it is a slightly imperfect casting. I'm sure they all are. So you want to get that top one, the first screw in just kind of taut, and get the second screw. Get that in there. Drop it into the threads backwards. Tighten that down all the way. Nice and tight. Then you can go back to the top. And you'll see that one loosened up a lot more, so now I can tighten it back down now that everything fell in place. And there you go. It is back together. Working exactly as intended. So down here is the little tension selector. You can see that little notch inside the red part that kind of moves back and forth just barely. But for mine, and there may be a way to set this, I'm not sure, but for standard for me, it sits just barely past 8. For intermediate, it sits about at 5. And then for minimum, it's going to sit right there at about 3. So there may be some way to tension that and fix it, but it seems to be working just fine for me, so I ain't going to fix it till it's broke. So, yeah, there you go. Hopefully that helps somebody. Keep some of these real good old tools back on the market. Keep from getting thrown in the dumpster. So, y'all have a good one.